in international relations literature is the assumption that we have an anarchic system. Remember when we talk about an anarchic system, what do we mean by anarchy in the international relations language?
States hold on to power. There's no power above the state.
There's no power above the state. So it means no adjudicating authority. It doesn't strictly speaking mean chaotic. It doesn't strictly speaking even necessarily mean violent. It means there's no adjudicating authority, right? So go back to the domestic example. All of us accept that there's domestic law that governs our behavior. International relations, it doesn't work that way. International relations, there's no higher adjudicating authority. In the last couple of classes, what I've started to try and do is to sort of challenge that assumption in different ways. The first one is we talked about global governance. Remember, global governance is where you have multiple actors contending together for steering mechanisms on global politics. They might be international organizations, they might be NGOs, they might be combinations of them. Global governance is a combination of different actors that tries to steer and mitigate forms of anarchy. And this is to suggest that we don't see pure anarchy in the system. We see lots of different actors contributing. In the last class, before we wrote for the snow day, we talked about the United Nations. And the United Nations is another major organization that is as close as we get to supranational governance. It's the big mistake with international relations with the United Nations. People tend to argue like the United Nations is like a government. I'll take you to the United Nations and get a resolution of this dispute. It doesn't exactly work like government. It's a supranational organization. It stands above nations. It requires on voluntary power. It has some means of coercion, some means of enforcement, but there are limited means of enforcement. What we're going to do today is go through two other things that help to mitigate anarchy. The first is international law, which is the rules that govern behavior between states. And international law, from a realist vantage point, doesn't make a lot of sense, and yet we know it's there. And then the second is regimes. And regimes are formal and informal institutions that govern state behavior on issue areas. Right? Formal and informal institutions around specific issue areas that govern state behavior. Both of these things work in very different ways to mitigate anarchy. Remember, if you're a realist, you assume, well, how do I calculate every interaction? Every interaction I should have should be calculated on the basis of power. And I should do what power suggests. But the U.S. states don't actually really do that. We know that they involve in a lot of different organizations. Global governance exerts some sort of effect. The United Nations exerts an effect. And today we're going to look at how international law exerts an effect, and then later how regimes, which are specific arrangements between states, governing arrangements between states, exercise regimes. One of the big differences between these two, and it's a key point of contrast between international law and theories of regimes, is the degree of buy-in and the degree of universality of this. International law, in theory, is a universal concept. All states are subject to international law. Every state, whether it would be North Korea, for example, is subject on some level to international law. Now, they may reject it, they may refuse to abide by it, they may deny jurisdiction, but in theory, all states are subject to international law. In the case of regimes, that is a voluntary agreement. You are subject to the regime if you sign up to the regime. Only states that are members of the World Trade Organization, only states that are members of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, only states that are members of the Whaling Convention are obliged to follow the rules of that particular regime. So the big difference when you think about this is that international law, in theory, is essentially an overarching legal framework for the international system, and when we come back to it, regimes are essentially voluntary agreements. What we actually see when we think about international law, remember, international law should, in theory, international law, in theory, if you're a realist, international law doesn't make a huge amount of sense. States are governed by a set of legal principles that, in many cases, restrain powerful states. So a lot of realists puzzle over international law. They say, why is it that states, for example, will accept rules on the use of force? If we're in an anarchic self-help system, if the most powerful state is the system should be able to trump the other states in the system, if things are really adjudicated on the basis of power, then why would the United States, to give you an example, care about whether it has a UN Security Council resolution on Syria? Why would it care about whether it's consistent with international law in its obedience to the Landmine Convention? Why do states care about international law? That's the great puzzle for realism. And what you actually see is that states are extraordinarily careful about international law, despite the fact that realism tells them, in fact, why would you bother? You only really care about powerful relationships between states. I'll give you a couple examples of how states have paid attention to international law in really unique ways. The first is diplomatic protocol. Does anybody know how diplomatic protocol ever emerged? Anybody know? Well, parking tickets play a role in this, and we'll talk. Actually, I'll explain to you why UN diplomats in New York do not have to pay parking tickets. Anybody know how diplomatic protocol emerges?
During the Florentine or like Machiavelli period, they had diplomats in various Italian states, and he had a promise not to kill them.
Yeah, it's Renaissance diplomacy. It's Italian Renaissance diplomacy of the 1600s, around Machiavelli's time. What you start to see is the emergence of diplomatic protocol emerging during that period of time. And what do we mean by diplomatic protocol? The designation of someone as an ambassador is the chief representative of that particular country. The notion that your ambassadors should be free from the subject of domestic law. Now, why would you want your ambassador to be free from the subject of domestic law? Would I not want to be able to do to your ambassador? Kill them, punish them, jail them, hold them, interrogate them, torture them for information. So one of the things that established as a convention among the city-states of the Renaissance Italy was that if you're appointed as an ambassador, you are not subject to the laws of the states that you come into. You are protected by diplomatic immunity. That explains why today a UN diplomat doesn't have to pay the parking ticket. Because what we originally wanted was a situation where if you're an ambassador, you are protected and you are owed that. This is one of the reasons why ambassadors present their credentials to the head of state. You ever watch? Presidents always receive credentials of ambassadors. Why is that? Because officially, the old tradition was you would present your credentials to the king. The king would grant you sovereign immunity from the laws in the territory, and then from that point forward, you are immune from those laws. Right? Now, by convention, you're supposed to pay your taxes. By convention, you're not supposed to blow red lights. But in practice, if you do so, you are protected by sovereign immunity. And it comes from a Renaissance convention that says, if I send you in a dangerous environment from one city-state to another, I shouldn't be able to torture you, arrest you, or have you.
What happens if you break the law, though, while you're in that country?
I'm sorry?
What happens if, like, you were to break the law in, like, a really, like, in a heinous act or something while you're in that country?
They have a principle called comity. Comity means that my laws and your laws should be more or less consistent. So let's say I'm an ambassador in your country and I break the law in your country. In theory, what you should offer is the prosecution of that person in your own country. I should recall you as the ambassador and say, I will try you for murder. Now, in some cases, states arrange comity agreements. I would accept that a British trial for murder is the same as an American trial for murder, so I would allow my diplomats to be tried for murder. Those are arrangements of legal comity between states. Strictly speaking, though, that in fact, actually, ambassadors don't have to do that. You could, in theory, commit a very serious crime and be pulled out. This has happened a couple different times. In Pakistan, the United States had a set of contractors, really spies, driving through Karachi, and they ran through a checkpoint and killed some people. They got into the middle of a firefight because a crowd in Karachi came to get the Americans that had killed, I think it was children. And the American ambassador pulled them out rather than go to a Pakistani jail. They originally were arrested by the Pakistani police. We negotiated for their exit. We said we would try them in the United States. That's the principle of comity. So there are cases under which diplomatic representatives get tried in home countries, or at least in theory they're supposed to. If it's particularly egregious, let's say you did something like a murder. If I'm the U.S. government, I might say, if this was out with your duties, and this was an egregious use of crime, I might permit you to be tried in that country. So in cases, countries can turn them over. But the original idea behind diplomatic practice was that that wasn't supposed to be the case. Now, you follow back from straight realism, that doesn't make a massive amount of sense, right? It doesn't make a massive amount of sense that you should, in fact, mitigate power on the basis of a diplomatic set of customs. I'll give you another interesting example. If any of you ever go to apply for a visa at an embassy, you are no longer standing on U.S. soil. You are standing on foreign soil. Now, why would they do that? Why is the soil of the Russian embassy in Washington considered Russian territory, not American territory? Why would you do that?
For those who were just claiming asylum, you have to be on foreign soil to do that. So, make that claim.
Yeah.
If you want to claim, asylum in France, all you have to do is go to the French embassy, and you're off U.S. soil in France.
Exactly. You're essentially in an embassy. You are on foreign soil. You can claim asylum. The idea is to hold those diplomats not subject to the laws of the states, but to hold them subject to the laws of their home state. So, for example, it is illegal in the United States to spy, but is it illegal to run a spying operation off a foreign embassy? No, it is not, because you're on foreign territory. Right? So this is the way that international law actually operates. This is why Julian Assange, by the way, the head of WikiLeaks, has been sitting in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Because as long as he remains in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, he can't actually be removed. He is technically on Ecuadorian territory, so hence then subject to Ecuadorian law. And if Ecuador as a government chooses to protect Julian Assange, all the British police can do is sit outside and look at him, but they can't stop him. The London police have actually been angry about this because they've now carried a 3-year stakeout, paying a tremendous sum of money, watching Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy. And this is why asylum seekers run into the embassies. If you ever watch that happen, because suddenly you're subject to different laws. That's a curious set of diplomatic customs. If we follow realism, Now, if the system is really just adjudicated on the basis of power, there's no consensus. There's no reason why the United States should obey diplomatic customs, granting these states immunity from its laws on its own territory. But in fact, actually, they do so. States obey international law even when they don't have to. States obey and protect international law, and are weirdly protective of international law in different ways, even in fact, actually, if it actually causes them some substantial disadvantage.
Can you explain what you meant by comedy again?
Comedy means that I owe you respect for the principles of your laws, and you owe me respect for the principles of my laws. So let's say you kidnapped somebody or you conducted an assault, and let's say you're a Norwegian ambassador. If you're Norway's government, the choice really is this: if you conduct the assault in the United States, the American law enforcement officials, the police might say, "I want to arrest you because you conducted an assault, and I want to try you." The United States might do a diplomatic agreement with Norway, which says we will present the evidence in the Norwegian court and allow you to be tried in the Norwegian court because we assume prosecutions for assault are the same. Where you get into real issues is death penalty, right? The United States has the death penalty, certain states do, and a lot of foreign countries do not. And so there are extradition agreements problems between foreign countries and the United States, particularly when it involves the death penalty. And this is why there are certain European countries that cannot extradite to the United States because legally, under their laws, they're not allowed to extradite anybody to a country where there's a death penalty. And so you see that emerge from time to time. But for diplomatic representatives, usually the assumption would be, if I catch you, we will prosecute it. And where it gets tricky is things like low-level offenses, parking tickets. You know, the New York police stops the ambassador from India and says, you have $1,000 worth of parking tickets. He says, I have sovereign immunity. I'm protected by Indian laws. In theory, he should be prosecuted by Indian laws. In practice, he probably won't be. We can't adjudicate in the court unless the Indian government says, I give you the right to prosecute my ambassador in the court. Diplomatic protocol, and the idea is to stop ambassadors, the real idea is to stop ambassadors from being harassed, molested, DDoS, tortured. But in practice, what it says is because there's overall sovereign immunity of diplomatic representatives, they're protected from lesser crimes as well.
So you know in DC, like DuPont Circle, where it's like Embassy Row, so each one of those houses is a different, like a foreign territory?
It's a different foreign territory.
Police have like no, in that whole entire area, no jurisdiction?
The police can go in within consent. They can obviously drive on the streets. That's American territory. But once you get to the gate of the embassy is the territory of the country itself. And part of the reason what goes on to this is that, you know, in many cases, countries will let police into the embassies. Most of the routine transactions are perfectly routine. But in theory, if there was a violent crime and someone fled to the embassy, the ambassador would have to grant you access, grant the police access onto Italian territory, Spanish territory, Indian territory, whatever it might be. That's the way diplomatic custom works. Equally, if you're in the United States and you're suddenly in a dangerous position and you're worried that you're going to get arrested as a political dissenter or something like that, what do you see people do? They flee to the American embassy. Once they're in the American embassy, they're under American laws. Now, the problem is that only applies under nationhood, right? So the only people who are entitled to American protection are American passport holders. If a foreign citizen travels to a U.S. embassy, they're not owed anything. An American citizen travels to an American embassy. By the way, that's what consular staff in embassies do. Their job is to get American citizens out of trouble. That's what they basically do. There was another question.
So when Benghazi got attacked, for example, that would be like technically an attack on American soil because it's an
When
American.
you did?
Benghazi,
Right.
like the embassy there, when that got attacked.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like an attack on American soil because.
Yes. Yes. So the ambassador was Ambassador Christopher Stevens was owed sovereign immunity and diplomatic protection by the government of Libya. In practice, the government of Libya had descended into a civil war. He, in the embassy itself, which was then attacked, he should be immune. That is technically an attack on U.S. territory. Because it's an attack on U.S. territory, the U.S. asserts the right to have U.S. military personnel present. This is why if you go to a U.S. embassy in a foreign country, you're going to see the Marines. Right? That's why you see them there. Because they are allowed to patrol that just like they're patrolling an American base. He was technically in an American-owned or American-leased facility off the main embassy compound when that happened. That doesn't stop him from being immune, nor does it stop any other American diplomat. This is not just the ambassador. They should, in theory, have diplomatic immunity. Essentially, there was an assault in the compound. The story I heard, I don't know if this is true, but that this was a CIA buyback program for weapons that we've given them in the Libyan Revolution. And that what has come out of it has been that the ambassador was off compound and somebody dimed out a series of militia on where the ambassador was. Right? And so the ambassador was in a less protected compound because he was buying back weapons from a force. And so essentially someone betrayed him and told him kind of where it was. And that's why that happened. It doesn't stop his legal protection. And this is why the American military was allowed to go in, because you're protecting American soil. And it's the job of the State Department to be responsible to protect American soil. So they have a diplomatic and security consular service. Its job is to protect U.S. embassy employees. And it's not uncommon for embassies to be attacked. That's a fairly normal thing. It's rare for ambassadors to be killed, but not exceptional. If you want a really interesting encounter, look at the Iranian Revolution in 1978, right? What happened? Iranian protesters stormed the U.S. embassy and held the ambassador and a number of diplomatic representatives hostage. That's what you see in the Iranian embassy. Again, violation of U.S. territory. Strictly speaking, that's an invasion on U.S. territory. And that's why states are so funny about permitting diplomatic recognition. When you permit diplomatic recognition, you're permitting an embassy. You permit a state to build an embassy. That embassy then becomes the soil of that state. And this is why people have argued our embassy in Iraq is very big. It looks like a military compound. People said that's too big, right, for that reason. But the point is here is, if you think about this as a set of customs, that's an unusual set of customs drawn from Renaissance diplomacy that states follow. They should, in theory, follow that. Think also as another example. Think about the Iraq War. The United States wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, but it went multiple times to the UN Security Council to get a resolution, and attempted to find Saddam Hussein in violation of various principles of international law and treaties. Now, if states only care about adjudication of power, the United States should have spent a lot less time with the UN Security Council than it did. But in practice, international law exerts a strong normative effect. States spend a lot of time worried about international law. They spend a lot of time worried about making sure that their principles are consistent with international law. Even after the Iraq War became incredibly controversial, the Bush administration argued it was consistent with international law. And argued it was consistent with these principles. States spend a lot of time thinking about this. Why do states care so much about international law? A couple different practical reasons. The first is they lower transaction costs. If you were to think about an international system where we were constantly negotiating every single issue area on the basis of power, what would that be? A costly system? A time-consuming system? A difficult system? By accepting that there's a set of conventional frameworks under which we agree that I treat you in this way and you treat me in that way, states radically lower transaction costs. It's a simpler system. And you can see this really clearly in trade. If we have very common agreements on tariff, it's a lower transaction cost system. If I don't have to worry if my plane can land in your airport, if everybody signs to an agreement about why my plane can land in your airport, lowers transaction costs. So a lot of states in the system have a very strong incentive to use international law because it lowers transaction costs. It also allows for stable cooperation. I can expect things from you. States almost always are worried about trying to gauge the intentions of other states, but international law regularizes the expectations of what you should expect. And therefore, cooperation is easier. If we all abide by international law, I can expect you will do certain sets of things. I can expect the transaction costs are lower, therefore I have a strong incentive to follow it. And so what you see is a lot of states sign up to international law, in many cases, because they want stable cooperation. They want to know what you're going to do. And if it's rule-bound and an advantageous system, they'll follow it. And finally, it limits disputes. States can take political disputes and turn them into legal disputes. You see this in the South China Sea. They're taking a fundamental political dispute about who owns the islands in the South China Sea, they're turning it into a legal dispute. And legal disputes actually have a way of sort of lowering the cost of political conflict. I turned it from an area under which we might fight about it to a point where we negotiate in the law about it. That's a very different area. So international law has an effect of transforming areas. In the book, in the chapter that you guys had about international law, you'll have read that they talked about international law as an autonomous area. And this is what they mean, that if I can transfer something from an issue of politics to an issue of law, in a sense, I strip it of the potential for conflict, and I make it a much more stable system. International law has a long and distinguished tradition. If you were to go back to the diplomatic protocols in the Renaissance area, there's a good book called Renaissance Diplomacy by Garrett Manley, who's a historian. That does a really nice job of discussing that. But you can also go all the way back to the Treaty of Augsburg, the Treaty of Westphalia, the Treaty of Utrecht, and you can see the origins of international law, really around the 15th, 16th, and 17th century. Many of the treaties between European states around that period of time, particularly Westphalia, were extraordinarily important for grounding principles of international law. Those treaties articulated how states treated other states. Now, what were those treaties overwhelmingly concerned with? They were overwhelmingly concerned with some core principles. One is sovereignty, the notion that you are sovereign and control your own territory. This is when you hear the king is referred to as sovereign. That's what we need. They control their own territory. It also means that they dictate behavior inside those territories. Now, what kind of behavior were they worried about that particular time? They dictate a lot about the society itself.
Was it religion?
Religion. They were particularly worried that the sovereign determined the religious character of the state. Right? So a Protestant state in England, a Catholic state in France, and that the sovereign determined the religion of the state. And that when they established the principle of non-interference in international politics, that was what they were trying to argue. That I should not, as a Catholic monarch, be trying to convert the Protestants of England. And the idea was to establish principles of non-interference and principles of sovereignty. The other major principle that comes out of this is called the principle of territorial integrity. And the idea is fairly simple. that your territory is your own. States should not violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of other states. Now, what's interesting is today, if you actually listen to international law, if you read any accounts of international law, those same principles are repeated in a kind of modern context. People say, why should you not be engaged in intervention in Syria? Well, because it violates the sovereignty of Syria, and it violates the territorial integrity of the Syrian state. That same language you get from the Treaty of Westphalia that was done in an absolute monarchist context now applies in contemporary politics. And what you see is that international law as a tradition takes those concepts, applies it to originally European principalities, absolute monarchs, moves it up to the modern context. Many of the original jurists, people like de Vittel and Grotius, were designed essentially to try and find ways under which you turned international politics less violent. It's hard to understand international law unless you understand that people like Grotius were saying, what I need to do is to find out a way under which it's no longer sword against sword by monarch, but there are governed rules under which I can understand that monarch versus monarch will respect each other's basic principles and rights. That's what international law is designed to do. And you really get out of this the laws of war. Grotius and Vittel really start to articulate the laws of war on a Christian concept. And the laws of war are basically about whether you can wage war, right, jus ad bellum, or how you behave when you're in war, jus ad bellum. And the idea was to tame war as much as possible, right? Not to allow war to essentially be the war of all against all. And what you originally see in this is an idea that we want to establish ways under which war is governed, war is regular between states, but war is limited, war does not attract the civilian population, and that we find a way under which the relationships between states are protected in some important sets of ways. And Grotius and Vittel have done this. Grotius is seen as the father of modern international law. If you ever study international law, you'll read a lot of Grotius. Vittel less so, but you do see a lot of this, essentially, the sort of origins of international law. What's interesting about this, and the book points this out that you guys have, is that despite the fact that this is assuming, first, a European context, secondly, absolute monarchies, it gets translated into the modern era. It gets translated into representative republican regimes, and it gets spread around the world. Today, what's interesting is that the core of international law, which was fundamentally European, right? Originally, if you go back to the notions of how international law applied, states did not assume that the developing world had international law that applied to them. They assumed essentially only other European monarchs were subject to international law. In other words, colonized peoples weren't subject to the protections of international law, but the civilized peoples were, right? If you go back to it, there's a very European, Eurocentric emphasis on this. Despite that fact, international law has now traveled in large parts of the world, Africa, Asia, Middle East, all of them essentially obey the principles of more than anything else. By the way, if you guys are ever interested in this, there's a really interesting analog between the way they construct international law and natural law. The notion of a natural rule, a natural form of law or behavior that was governed by God, essential in Christendom, between how people behave towards each other, how states behave towards each other, the sense of the natural law within states becomes an origin of the notion of international law. A lot of what people like Grotius and Vittel assumed they were doing was taking principles of natural law and applying it to between states. That's essentially what they assumed they were doing. But it's interesting that it has traveled until the contemporary period. What are the major sources of international law? Where do you get international law from? Well, one of the most important points to stress is that international law is not something that you get from a sort of defined corpus of body or law. It's not like it is in the United States, where people will say there's Pennsylvania law, there's New Jersey law, there's federal law, and there's clear corpuses of law. What you get with international law is multiple contending sources. Those multiple contending sources may sometimes conflict with each other. So just like we don't have a sovereign and one set of laws, we have no sovereign and we have a corpus of law that may be sometimes fuzzy. I'm going to give you some examples of how this can be complicated. 4 major sources of international law. The first major source of international law are treaties. States sign up to treaties. This can be things like the Landmine Convention, the Whaling Convention. States will sign up to treaties. And for example, there's a lot of treaties that you don't see, that you don't pay a lot of attention to. For example, treaties on civil aviation, treaties on the law of the sea. The law of the sea is one of the most important ones. Anybody know what the law of the sea does? Anybody know what the law of the sea actually does? George.
It's trade routes, isn't it?
Trade routes, it establishes some free trade routes, does, but it also establishes sort of territorial borders, right?
I was going to say, this like expands your territory out further than the actual land itself.
Yeah, the law of the sea says 150 miles off your coast is your sovereign territory. And once you get 150 miles off your coast, it's no longer your sovereign territory. What does that mean? That means a ship of any flag can fly off your waters, sail off your waters 150 miles off that. And it governs things like, well, when can the Coast Guard interdict? What obligations does the Coast Guard have to protect ships? What kind of free shipping rights do I have through areas under which you have multiple contending forms of sovereignty? That is to say, when you have two territorial claims that are more or less in the same part of the border, what sort of protections and rights do you have? It's an extraordinarily important thing for shipping. Worldwide shipping is a massive thing. And it also requires states to behave. And what you see is that because so many states are sort of interested in free shipping and a free relationship, even states that are bitter enemies will respect the law of the sea against each other. And the same thing with the International Civil Aviation Organization. They'll respect that sort of, where can my plane land? What standards should my plane have? What kind of airports are appropriate for this? What rights do I have? Here's a really interesting one. What rights do I have in the event of an emergency to land? If I'm an American airliner and I'm over Russia, I have an emergency on board. Can I land in St. Petersburg even though nobody on the plane has a visa? Right? This is the practical stuff that a lot of treaties of international law are designed essentially to govern, to allow states to cooperate. And think about this again, back to the question of lowering transaction costs. If I had to negotiate each separate instance of this, it would be very high cost. In practice, I don't with international law. I agree to treaties, I agree to fundamental principles of this, and that allows me to bind the states. The second sort of major source of law are corpus of laws that comes from treaties, comes from international law as well, comes from treaties and state agreements, which are called the jus cogens principle of international law. And they mean that they cannot be derogated. And so when a state asserts something as a jus cogens principle, that means it cannot be violated. Now, in practice, it sometimes is. One of the most interesting examples of this is the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention has been asserted to be a jus cogens principle of international law. What does that mean? The Genocide Convention positively obliges states to stop genocide. However, they often don't. What it says when you assert that it's a jus cogens principle of international law is that even if you didn't sign up to the treaty, you're obliged to follow it. So let's say Syria never signed up to the principle of the Genocide Convention. It's still obliged to follow it. Now that's very different than conventional notions of law. What states are in a system that operates is to say that you may not have consented to a piece of legislation, you may not have consented to a treaty, and yet you are nevertheless obliged to follow it. Very, very, very different principle than traditional law. And those principles are seen as rare. They are articulated from treaty and from practice, but they do exist. And states will occasionally be told that they are in violation of the jus cogens principle. Other sources, I think the most interesting source is customary international law. Customary international law is practice, state practice. What does that mean? In practice, it means states can do things and patterns of state behavior can make law. If states regularly behave in certain ways, we can argue that there is an emerging principle of customary international law, and therefore argue that states are in violation of it. Now, think about how fuzzy that is, right? We're used to a domestic context under which there is Pennsylvania state law, there's an adjudicating authority. If I violate it, then I go to a judge, and the judge says you violated it or you didn't. Think about international law. There are treaties I signed up to. There are principles I didn't sign up to that still apply to me. There's customary international law where all the rest of you behave in a certain way, and suddenly I'm bound by the way that you behave. Right? Very different sources of international law. This is one of the reasons, if you guys follow, a lot of conservative thinkers are very opposed to international law. You get a lot of Republicans arguing international law should not apply. And one of the arguments they make is international law as a corpus of law exists as this kind of shifty, amorphous body of state practice that the United States never actually formally signed up to, and yet is somehow obliged to follow. International law does not work like conventional domestic law. And this is in part because there is no sovereign adjudicator. The fourth source of international law is what's called as opinio juris, which is the opinion of the court. And it literally means court precedent. If the court rules in a particular case about a general principle, and that is followed up and embodied by state practice, it can become law. That allows judges at the International Criminal Court, for example, judges at the International Court of Justice, to actually have a lawmaking function. Again, go back to the conservative critique of where that might come from. What would a conservative say about that?
Sure, you can only make the ruling if people agree to go to the court.
Right. First, you can only make the ruling if you get people agree to go to court, right? So adjudication is voluntary.
There has to be a statutory basis for what you're suing under.
Yeah, there has to be statutory basis. There's no statutory basis. It's blending legislative and judicial functions, right? The judge can essentially make law. That blends legislative and judicial functions. There's no statutory basis.
Can you like reiterate that? What does that mean?
It means, so let's say, for example, there's a dispute in the law of the sea, and two countries go up and they are talking about emerging principles of whether I should be able to sail in the South China Sea. It goes to a judge. Let's say the judge reviews the case and issues a ruling of precedent that says when in these circumstances states should obey the following principles on the basis of the following statute. The judge's own ruling can later be incorporated as a statute, as almost an emergence piece of legislation that other states are bound by. Precedent travels. And so what you get with international law is not what you get in domestic law. You have four sources: treaties I signed up to, customary international law, which is collective practice, the opinions of judges, and certain principles that are considered so fundamental that are asserted by legal practice and by other states to be jus cogens principles of international law.
What court? What court are they talking about? Are they talking about the Hague? Are there courts at the UN that they go to?
The most important court really is the International Court of Justice. That's where you see most of the prosecutions go. That's part of the UN system. The International Court of Justice exists to adjudicate disputes between states. And the International Court of Justice, works in the following way. If there's a dispute over waterways, and I'm just going to take two countries, India and Pakistan as an example. India and Pakistan might sue each other over a dispute over waterways. They would take the International Court of Justice. One of the interesting points about adjudication in the International Criminal Court is that it's voluntary. If either India or Pakistan refuse to subject their own dispute to the court, then the court has no jurisdiction. The court can only exercise voluntary jurisdiction. When the court exercises voluntary jurisdiction, it can place a ruling. That ruling can simply say you're in violation of the treaty, or the ruling can be broader. The ruling can say you're in violation of customary international law. In other words, states in similar situations elsewhere have practiced that this is violated. Or it can simply create law, right? The judge can actually say, in circumstances where we don't have state practice, opinion juris will make the rule for this, and then the opinion juris of that particular dispute travels into legislation and precedent for other cases. That's the way that works. But it's still consensual. There are lower courts. There are specific issue area courts. There's a maritime court. There's a number of smaller sort of subsidiary courts. There's also the International Criminal Court, which exists to prosecute individuals. That is created by the Rome Statute. That was created by a treaty. That's a treaty court. Meaning that unless you signed up to it, you were not subject to the Rome Statute. The United States refused to sign up to the International Criminal Court. Therefore, our soldiers are not subject to the Criminal Court.
So, what makes these laws binding? Like, how does this differ from the voluntary aspects of a regime?
That's the fascinating thing. Nothing. So let's say we get the court together, and you and I are in a dispute, and the court finds that I'm in the wrong. If you say, okay, you're in the wrong, and I say, well, listen, the court may have ruled that way, but I'm simply not going to obey, the court has no enforcement. Right? You may have an enforcement. You may be able to go back and say, well, state, you were wrong, and clearly we took this to the International Court of Justice. You're clearly wrong, and you might be able to try and get other states to sanction me. You might be able to take it to the UN Security Council. But in practice, there is no enforcement. And this is what's so different about the system, right? You have no enforcement, no supranational organization, no clear corpus of laws, and essentially evolving law.
So if they don't have to follow the law, what incentivizes them to actually follow the law?
That's a really good question. Why do they bother? Like, why would you follow the law? Well, sometimes you might follow the law because it's a technical dispute. A lot of what you see is a technical dispute, right? So let's say we have a technical dispute over the law of the sea. It's lower transaction costs. If I'm not really going to fight you over it, there might be reasons I might want to obey. Sometimes you do it because you think you're going to win the case and you subject yourself to the jurisdiction and you lose the case. Other reasons are shame and pressure from other states. States that regularly flout international law tend to fall under a lot of pressure from other states and shame. But strictly speaking, there's nothing to make you. You largely do it on a voluntary basis. It's one of the big puzzles in international law. I've got friends who work on this. Why do it? Why bother? Like, if there's no enforcement, really, why do states do it? And one of the interesting mechanisms is shame. States like to be rule compliant. Now, if it really matters to them, they won't. And what you often find is if it matters a lot, they won't subject it to the ICJ. They won't take it to the International Criminal Court. States only take things to the International Criminal Court like good lawyers that they think they're going to win. They never take stuff to the International Criminal Court or International Court of Justice that they think they're going to lose. But generally speaking, it's shame mechanisms, it's political pressure. But there are a lot of cases under which the United States has, for example, been found wrong or found sort of lost the case in the International Court of Justice. And the United States essentially says, forget it, I'm not following it. And this is why the realist critique of international law is to say, look, this is epiphenomenal. Right? If fundamentally I don't have to subject myself to the jurisdiction, if I can essentially reject the jurisdiction, then why do I care? And yet we know that states regularly subject themselves to the jurisdiction and more or less behave in law-abiding behavior. Right? So it's a really fascinating thing. Questions? It's a really fascinating thing. This question of enforcement is a really, really important enforcement. When I took international law in graduate school, the person who taught it regularly would tell these students very dry sense of humor. And he would go through the case and then go through how it was ruled in one direction or another, and then he would smile. And and say, but the United States refused to obey. Or, Israel was taken to this court, and it was found that it shouldn't be putting new homes on Palestinian territories, and yet Israel said, I'm simply not going to listen to you. And that's the problem with international law. Does it work as a largely normative question? Does it resolve a lot of routine transactional things? Yes. When you get it to real central disputes, it doesn't. And particularly if you have actors that are less motivated by shame. One of the interesting questions is North Korea. North Korea is not motivated by shame. So it's very hard to motivate North Korea in international law, right? It doesn't behave that way. Generally speaking, it works better between states or allies. A couple things to think about with this. When you think about adjudications, particularly with extradition, because there is very few cases of what's called universal jurisdiction, most of the time you have to accept the jurisdiction or the right to rule of the court. So under international law, jurisdiction is rarely universal. There are a class of crimes under which jurisdiction is considered universal. Anybody know what class of crimes this would be? War crimes. Genocide, crimes against humanity, things like things that are really egregious forms of violence. Those are considered crimes that have universal jurisdiction. That's an emerging principle of international law. What it says is, states are obliged to prosecute it even if they don't sign up to the treaty in the International Criminal Court or any other court. That because the universal principles of international law are not just instantiated through the International Criminal Court, but they are incorporated within existing state practice, states are positively obliged to pursue this. So what does that mean? Let's say you're France, and someone who's been indicted for genocide shows up on your shores. Under international law, you are positively obliged to arrest that person and to prosecute that person under French law.
So is that the use codes principle that you're talking about?
Yeah, it is considered a use cogens principle. Use cogens principles are principles you cannot derogate, and then an overlapping but important part of that is whether there's jurisdiction. Universal jurisdiction says you cannot escape it. And there are very limited sets of cases for universal jurisdiction. People have argued aggression, probably not. Genocide, certainly, crimes against humanity. And you see this really clearly in cases where people say, well, for example, if we indict George W. Bush for war crimes under the International Criminal Court, if he were to show up in Britain, Britain would be positively obliged under universal jurisdiction to prosecute George W. Bush. And then an individual jurist in Britain, or individual judge, could issue a warrant to hold George W. Bush for those reasons. That's why you see that. And this is part of the reason why the U.S. won't sign up to the ICC. The U.S. is very concerned that what happens is American presidents, American soldiers go onto the ICC, they are indicted for war crimes, they show up in Spain, they're arrested. We actually had this where a bunch of CIA representatives had conducted extradition and torture and were arrested in Italy. And the U.S. is very concerned about this. Now, advocates of universal jurisdiction say, look, it doesn't matter whether the U.S. signed up to the ICC or not. If genocide is a use cogens principle of international law, if universal jurisdiction applies, whether they sign up to it or not is irrelevant. If they commit genocide, they're obliged, right? Then a state is obliged to arrest them. Now, do states do it? No. Do you guys remember the Kony 2012 campaign? That was what that was about. That was about trying to get states to arrest Kony if they could find him. The problem is you actually have to get the guy, and then you have to arrest him. States don't always do that.
So the United States was scared that if they did something wrong, someone would like hold them accountable to it to some degree, or
So they were worried about, let's say you're in Iraq.
or like my big thing is like what country why would other countries go after individual soldiers? Like we have a lot of soldiers. What would be the motivation to go after individual ones? Like in practice, what are we scared of?
Let's say you're the chief of the army during the Iraq War. And let's say there's been clear evidence that army officers tortured Iraqi civilians in Abu Ghraib and committed sexual violence, which they did do. Let's say that army officer was never punished, the army commander was never punished. He goes to Britain on vacation. The International Criminal Court issues an indictment for him because he was never prosecuted in the U.S. court. He is somewhere in Wales and gets arrested by a local judge. And this is where what they're concerned about is that because any court can issue a warrant, it's not clear that it's going to be the individual person responsible for it. It could be higher commanding officials. I mean, every time Henry Kissinger goes anywhere, there's an attempt to arrest him, by the way. Henry Kissinger can't leave the United States. There's actually a website called Kissinger Watch. And because the argument is Kissinger conducted the bombing of Cambodia and Laos, and if Kissinger lands in London and gives a talk in London, then a British judge could also issue an indictment and could hold 93-year-old Henry Kissinger for trial. And this is what you start to see with a lot of cases. And people have actually argued, it's a really interesting argument, people have actually argued this is actually bad. And the reason this is bad is sometimes you want to give the dictator a villa on the Riviera. That sometimes if you can't get rid of them, you want to build on the Riviera for that guy. And that happened a lot of times in the 70s. Idi Amin, for example, people like that, sent to Saudi Arabia, no universal jurisdiction to get him out of the country. Think about Bashar al-Assad. If I'm the U.S., I want Bashar al-Assad out of Syria. And the best deal I might have, if I can't kill him, is to probably get him to a bill in the Riviera. And the French would do this regularly. But if there's universal jurisdiction and the French know that he's responsible for genocide or war crimes, and that's incorporated within French law, then it's a positive obligation of the French state to arrest Bashar al-Assad, which means he can no longer go to France. Which means where's he going to go if he can't escape universal jurisdiction? He's going to sit in Syria. It's going to be harder to move them. This actually happened in the Balkans. There were a lot of discussions of this. Could we get rid of Milosevic in Serbia? Could we have actually moved him out? Maybe, but because he was subject to war crimes, it's actually a problem. So there is actually a practical argument here. The way you do this is you go to countries that have no relationship at all with the ICC, absolutely refuse to incorporate this within the principle. Saudi Arabia, for example, you can send them to places like in the Gulf, but it's very difficult to get them outside of those sort of areas because you're worried about that. And that's the U.S. critique of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has in practice also held heads of state responsible. A number of African heads of states have been held responsible for crimes within their territory. And defenders of the International Criminal Court say, it's a good thing. Go back to your Machiavelli. If you can hold the prince accountable, it's a good thing, and it will encourage good behavior on the part of the prince. And so what you want is leaders afraid of being indicted. And one of the interesting empirical questions is, do states that potentially have their leaders worried that they could be indicted for war crimes, do they behave more carefully when they fight? Do they not do things that they would have ordinarily done? Really interesting kind of empirical question. Hard to judge, right, because it's judging a negative, but it's a really fascinating question. If the International Criminal Court exists as jurisdiction and Jonathan's a dictator, does Jonathan rein his behavior if he thinks he can get arrested afterwards or not? And there's a really interesting set of literature about incentive structures and how you actually would know that. But the entire idea behind this is that most of the time for International Criminal Court, because it's a treaty-based court, it really only applies if you signed up to the treaty. So the U.S. refused to sign, therefore International Criminal Court jurisdiction does not apply for U.S. individuals. Now, if you argue that they committed a serious crime like genocide or ethnic cleansing that's a use Kogan's principle, they probably could get arrested in the European court. Right? Probably. The question is whether the Europeans want to do it. They did this actually with Pinochet in Argentina. You guys remember that case of Pinochet in Argentina, the dictator? Anybody remember Pinochet? Dictator? Remember, where was he arrested?
I don't know.
Arrested in Spain. He was arrested in Spain. He went on vacation in Spain, was arrested, and actually put on jail, put on crime, was supposed to go on trial for a series of war crimes in Spain for what he did. This is what you begin to see. And a lot of people argue what we've now done is we've shifted from holding states accountable to individuals accountable, right, which is a different argument. A couple things to think about as you think about how international law functions. International law, beyond the enforcement, people say, well, if it can enforce, if it's a kind of weak and fuzzy form of international law, then what's the point? Part of the argument is that it structures a language. It structures how you dispute things. It gives a language to states. States that ordinarily would have framed things in power politics now frame things as a matter of law. You're in violation of the UN Security Council. You're in violation of international law. As a nice example of this, think about Israel, right? Israel is regularly attacked for building lands on Palestinian territories. We have about 400,000 settlers in the West Bank at the moment. Those are in clear contravention of international law. When Israel is attacked for taking Palestinian territory, largely it's attacked because it's in violation of international law. Now, in practice, Israel says, I don't accept that, and I refuse to adjudicate that in a court. But the Palestinians are now moving to say, well, if I have the International Criminal Court and I'm a state entity, can I sue Israeli officials in the International Criminal Court? And if it's the case that Netanyahu could get arrested for war crimes or for crimes against humanity if he flew to a European state, does that change Netanyahu's behavior? Right? Maybe. Maybe not. And so what you're beginning to see with this is a case under which law provides a language for disputes and provides a way for you to take the dispute from a political dispute and turn it into a legal dispute. The other point to think about is that international law is shifting in a couple different important ways. One is that it's changing in terms of the legal personhood. If you were to think about international law during the period of Grotius or Vattel, the only people who had personhood or personhood under the law were states. Today, nonprofit organizations, NGOs, international organizations have legal personhood, and arguably individuals do. So international law is changing. If you were to go back to Grotius' time and say that an international court would indict a person, he would have said that's impossible. Today, we accept that international courts now indict individuals. individuals. That's changing personhood. The second interesting argument is that if you were to go back to older forms of international law, you would see that predominantly it was about order. It was about establishing relationships between states so that we had an orderly system. In practice, what's happened in international law today is it's more about justice. States are now trying to use international law for justice-related goals. Can I indict that person for war crimes? Can I indict that person for genocide? Can I indict that person for any types of political abuse? It's turning into a justice-related goal. Now, why that's so controversial is that it remains a Eurocentric core, right? It's largely a Eurocentric core. One of the great critiques of the ICC is to say the International Criminal Court is a Rome statute set up by European jurists, and who have they put on trial? African heads of states. Have they put the Americans on trial? They put a European state on trial? Are they putting the Israelis on trial? No, they're putting African heads of state on trial. And so one of the critiques you get, South Africa recently pulled out in the ICC for precisely this reason. They argue to say this is becoming a biased court. This is a court that is not fair, not representative. It's a Eurocentric court. And what's interesting about this is that you have this notion of justice, but again, it's not justice by a democratically elected state. It's a corpus of laws. So you're getting justice-related goals, and this is one of the critiques you get about lawyers. Lawyers there, especially in international law, often try and create precedent that allows them to achieve substantive justice-related goals, but there's a real question about legitimacy. Why do I listen to a justice on the court? Who elected that justice? Right? An unelected international lawyer creates a precedent that binds a state and then arrests my head of state, and no one ever appointed that lawyer? Right? International law has a legitimacy problem. It has a question about when it extends to strong justice-related goals. There are serious questions about whether, in fact, it is legitimate. Okay, any more questions on international law? You guys are all looking at me like this is a very confusing corpus of international law. You can do a course on this if you're ever interested. There's a really interesting set of stuff. I took courses on this. International law is fascinating. It's also maddening. Because if you read it, you begin to realize that in a lot of cases, it does regulate behaviors of states when it's low transaction, low cost. When it becomes high cost, states will not subject to international law. We are very unlikely to subject the South China Sea to international law. We may use it as a language to frame why China's wrong, but if it actually came to dispute, the U.S. is unlikely to do it. And the same thing when you look at cases like Israel, when you look at North Korea, very hard to handle that with international law. Weirdly, though, one of the interesting things is the U.S. used international law very effectively to box in Iran, particularly when using the nuclear issue. They used international law very effectively to box in Iran. You can do it in some cases if the state sees itself as a system actor. Okay, how is this different than regimes? What are regimes? Well, regimes are very different in international law. They're a little trickier to define. A regime is what's known as a rule-governed activity. And this can be formal and institutional, or it can be informal in practice. A regime is defined as rule-governed activity. That doesn't mean a lot, right? It's not a very good definition. Sometimes it's through an institution, sometimes it's not. Most of the times, it's quasi-institutionalized. So it's rule-governed activities that are quasi-institutionalized as agreements between states. Most regimes, but not all regimes, start as treaties. You start a treaty, you try and govern a certain issue area, that creates norms, expectations, and rules for state behavior, and states in practice follow it.
What does quasi mean?
Halfway, or almost. Almost institutionalized. Give me some examples of regimes. WTO. WTO is a fascinating example of a regime. It's now an organization, the World Trade Organization, but you know what it started as? The General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the GATT agreement in the 1960s, 1970s. And the GATT agreement essentially said states should agree to common sense principles for applying tariffs and common sense principles for open and free trade. And if I sign up to GATT, I have to agree not to discriminate. So for both GATT members, I can't apply discriminatory tariffs on you, you can't apply discriminatory tariffs on me. We're trapped in a relationship where we can't penalize each other with tariffs, we have to accept free trade, and we have to accept the minimum amount of subsidies. GATT agreements became the core of the international trading system during the Cold War. And originally, it started a case under which states would strike individual agreements that were part of GATT or adhere to GATT principles. So I might be the United States, Jonathan might be India, we might strike a deal, we agree to GATT principles, and that would be part of the overall GATT agreement. GATT eventually was converted in the early 1990s to the World Trade Organization. It became formally institutionalized. And states sign up to the World Trade Organization. When they sign up to the World Trade Organization, they bind themselves not to behave in certain ways. And in particular, they bind themselves not to apply discriminatory tariffs. They say, if I'm part of the free trade agreement, free trade has to be the principle, no discriminatory tariffs, fair tariffs. If I decide to apply a tariff, I have to submit it to GATT principles. And if I think you're unfairly dumping goods in my country, we have to accept the adjudication of the GATT court. What's interesting about this is that states then are essentially limiting their own macroeconomic and trade policies to behave as part of GATT. Again, from a regime vantage point, states join up to these things. They join up to these things for their own advantages, but they're essentially limiting themselves in a lot of important ways. States voluntarily say, I will no longer conduct trade wars. That's what GATT effectively does. Interestingly enough, Trump, if he applied the tariff to Mexico, would be in violation of WTO, and you could take him to the World Trade Organization adjudication body. I don't think Trump knows that. I'm pretty sure Trump doesn't know that. Trump never took globalization here at LaSalle. If he did, I would have told him. I'm just joking. But I don't think he knows that. I don't think he understands that you can't simply turn around to a country and say, I'm slapping a 35% tariff on you. If you do, you violate your membership in the World Trade Organization. You violate your membership in the World Trade Organization, a whole series of other trade problems follow from that. You do not have the discretionary principle that you, in fact, actually think you do. And so regimes work like general agreements between states that follow commonly accepted principles. I think the most interesting one is the one that I always think is fascinating, is the International Civil Aviation Organization. When you think about states not cooperating, right? What do they build? What does the International Civil Aviation Organization do? It agrees how airports are constructed, and it agrees the sort of rules and principles by which I can use your airport. And so, safety standards. It agrees, for example, that the language of air traffic control is English, and that every pilot needs to speak English. Doesn't matter what country they're from, they can speak their own language, but they speak English. Get on any plane worldwide, and they start off with the foreign language, or whatever language it is, and then they still go to English. Why English? Because the International Convention on Aviation says every pilot has to speak English. Why does every pilot have to speak English? Because every pilot needs to be able to land as an emergency in any other airport, and they have to be able to communicate with air traffic control. And air traffic controls, it governs certain procedures about how you land. So anywhere you are in the world, if you have an emergency, there is a set of procedures for how you land the aircraft. It governs comedy. If, for example, we had an emergency over Iranian airspace and we had to land in an Iranian airport, Iran can seize our plane. They also can't throw everybody who doesn't have an Iranian visa in jail, right? Because in theory, landing in those countries without a visa, you're in jail. But International Civil Aviation says as long as you remain within the airport, that the Iranian state will protect you and govern because it belongs as part of the agreement. This is a perfect example of a regime. States accept a common set of principles, a rule governs their behavior that applies between the states, but once they accept it, it's a collective organization and it governs and rules their behavior. You're seeing increasingly a large number of these on environment. The whaling convention is a fascinating one as well. Conventions against whaling, it starts as a treaty and more states sign up for it. And regimes kind of vary on their basis of institutionalization. Why are regimes interesting? Well, from a realist vantage point, they shouldn't happen. No state should turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to voluntarily limit my ability to conduct trade. I shouldn't ordinarily do that. From a realist vantage point, regimes don't make a massive amount of sense. The truth is that regimes exist because states want to find ways not to fight each other. They want to find ways under which they can have commonly accepted agreements that allow them to govern their behavior. And you have to think about why, in fact, actually they might do so. One of the interesting arguments is that realists have argued in game theoretic terms that regimes are sometimes useful if you're caught in a prisoner's dilemma. The benefits from cooperation outweigh the cost of defection. And that's what the chapter that you guys had this week talked a little bit about. You can use game theoretic arguments to say, well, there are reasons why I might want to cooperate if the benefits from cooperation are particularly high. Liberals make a different argument. The liberal argument is simple. They call it the shadow of the future. What do we mean by the shadow of the future? Guys got to read this stuff. And what do we mean by the shadow of the future? Anybody remember?
Along the lines of people will be more concerned with the response tomorrow than the actions today.
Yeah. Liberals say, look, states, when we think of this in game theoretic terms like a realist, we tend to assume every interaction in the game is unique. The truth is every game is not unique. States are playing multiple games with each other, and they're expecting multiple games in the future with each other. So what does that mean? States have an incentive to be a rule-abiding behavior, and states have an incentive to be worried actually about their reputation. If I'm North Korea and I keep breaking rules, then why would you do a deal with me? But if I expect that you and I are constantly stuck in interactions together, the shadow of the future, the idea that I will deal with you again in the future, makes me essentially more rule observant. And any of you guys can see this. If you're ever in an interaction, think about, for example, if you're buying a car, and you're going to press a hard bargain against somebody you don't know that person at all. You're going to press a hard bargain to buy that car. You might press the hardest thing you possibly can. Now think about it if you're buying a car from somebody that you know well. You expect future interactions. Will you be softer? Will you be less driving on the sort of demands on price? Probably. And this is the shadow of the future. The liberals' argument is to say, look, cooperation isn't a puzzle. These are regular states that will interact with each other over time. And therefore, for that reason, you should expect regimes to emerge, even when realists argue that they shouldn't. What's interesting about regimes is that regimes have a lot of game theoretic problems. A lot of people who study regimes use game theory to get you there, but you have to think about certain things. First is, how do you get your incentives to align as part of the regime? How do I make sure to regulate behavior? One of the ways I do so is I make sure the punishments for violating the terms of the regime are fairly high. Think of the GATT, or the World Trade Organization. I slap a tariff on a state and I have a very, very high punishment. Why would I do that? Just essentially make sure that my incentives are aligned to the behavior for the organization itself. A couple other things to think about. How do I stop defections from the regime? How do I punish defections? And how do I regulate incentives for free riding? What do we mean by free riding? From a public choice standpoint, what do we mean by free riding? Come on.
Benefiting from a public good.
Yeah, if I'm providing a public good, like let's say I'm providing free waterways, how do I stop you from just taking advantage of it? Right? If I'm in the United States and I'm sort of producing this as a question of sort of a general public good system, how do I stop you who refuse to sign up to the Maritime Convention on the Maritime Convention, for example, and not part of the maritime regime? How do I stop you from benefiting from it? And so regimes are designed to create ways in which you incentivize states to cooperate, you incentivize, make defection costly so they can't just walk from the regime, and you find ways to deal with problems of public goods. Public goods, particularly if public goods, are non-excludable. I can't exclude you from using free waterways if I create a system that's designed to allow free commerce and traffic. And maritime is really important in this aspect. How do I stop you from doing so? As a general matter, regimes are easier around economic issues and environmental issues than they are around security. Why? Why are regimes so hard in security?
There's a lot more at stake.
Almost at stake. And the conventional argument here is, if I think of an environmental whaling convention, if I'm a state that has no whaling industry whatsoever, the cost to me of signing that is negligible. I go to a convention, I sign a piece of paper, I'm done. Most cases, states for economic and environmental regimes will find that the costs are manageable. When you get to cases under which security is at stake, the relative gains issue becomes important. The cost of a security regime is high, and think about the risks of defection from a security regime. Very, very high. Right? People try to create regimes for counterterrorism, basically. Very hard to do. States want to lie. They don't want to sort of behave well. Nuclear weapons, really interesting one. Do we have a regime for nuclear weapons? Arguably. Right? The IAEA, the inspection, the Vienna Convention, arguably we have a regime for it. What do we see? States don't trust the regime. And so from a straight realist vantage point, it makes a little bit of sense. Environmental and economic cooperation is clear, gains are clear, relative gains are offset because you're in multiple sets of regimes. But when you get to the question of security, security regimes are remarkably hard to maintain. Security regimes are rare, they're hard to maintain, they occasionally happen. They generally tend to happen when it's low cost stuff, or stuff that's easy to give up. Landmine conventions, chemical weapons is a fascinating one. Do states abide by the Chemical Weapons Convention? Mostly. Syria is using chemical weapons, they're gassing their own people, the Russians are funding them. The US had a secret chemical weapons program, the Russians have a secret chemical weapons program. States will lie and say they have secret chemical weapons programs, most have given that up. Difficulty with problems with security regimes is because the problems of relative gains are so high, enforcement is very difficult. It's very difficult for me to know when you have chemical weapons. You'll often lie, you'll hide, you'll refuse enforcement. It's very easy for me to know if you cheat on the environmental regulation. Easier. It's easier for me to know if you cheat on trade. Hard for me to know if you cheat on security. So security is hard to get regimes on. Environmental and other regimes. Okay. One way, last couple points I'll talk about. One way we talk about regimes is the realists argue, and they say, how can regimes start? Is that regimes sometimes are started by a hegemonic system. What's a hegemon? Talk about hegemonic stability theory. Talk about the hegemon system.
Isn't it like the large power like in that specific thing, like area, so like Apple would be considered the hegemon of computers?
Yeah, it's the most powerful state in the system. And that's an Apple and the computer system is a good analogy. It's the most powerful state in the system. And what realists began to realize about the 1970s, early 1980s, there was a wave of literature on this, is that hegemons tend to create regimes. Think about Britain during the imperial era, but the United States in the post-Cold War period. Here's the United States. It's the most powerful state in the system in the post-1945 era, and what does it wind up doing? creating International Civil Aviation, Intellectual Maritime, creating GATT. GATT is fascinating from an American vantage point. The U.S. creates and spearheads the Convention on Trade and Tariffs, limits its ability to conduct trade wars, opens its market to foreign goods, and allows other states to produce goods into its country. By doing so, it weakens domestic manufacturing. Hegemons sometimes create regimes, and they will create agreements that are designed to regulate behavior. Now, why do hegemons do that? Why would the most powerful state in the system bind itself to regimes?
It's sort of the status quo power. They want to keep things as they are, therefore that will preserve their power.
Okay.
You know, all their states were different states. They were the ones who create regimes would be kind of in their favor to boost them up.
Yeah.
Whereas, if the hegemon does it, it keeps everything at the level where it's at.
Okay. All right, so strong sort of status quo bias.
Because they know they don't actually have to abide by them.
They can violate them from time to time. Although what was interesting is that hegemons rarely violate them. If you think with the United States, right, it could have conducted a lot of trade wars, the Cold War didn't. They can violate it. They can always pull out. In the most powerful state of the system, they can pull out, but they don't.
Isn't it like kind of like a power play to keep the status quo if you're at the top?
It can be considered powerful. Think about enforcement. If you don't have a regime and you're the hegemon, what are you doing? You're constantly enforcing each state to obey by the rules. But what if you create a regime system? Enforcement is regularized and normalized between the states, and the hegemon doesn't have to individually enforce. The hegemon can accept the status quo system. Hegemons tend to create regimes. And they tend to create this, it's called regime stability theory. They tend to create stable regimes that allow other states to participate. The United States is a fascinating example of this. Post-1945, the U.S. is the most powerful state in the system. And what does it do? It creates a free trade system, environmental systems, regulations, treaties, civil aviation, maritime, binds its hands, invites the Soviet Union to participate. Why? Because by doing so, it doesn't have to enforce cooperation by multiple regimes, by multiple states. It doesn't itself have to police cooperation. In fact, it lowers its policing costs. What's interesting about regimes is if you look at regimes over time, those regimes are supported by the power of the hegemon in the system, and gradually they tend to shift against the hegemon. I think this is one of the most interesting pieces of it. If you think about it, the U.S. creates the World Trade Organization. Does the World Trade Organization work for the United States now? Not really. Hegemons tend to allow discrimination by other states against them to the point where their power advantages are undercut by their value in the regime. They tend to do that over time. What's interesting about this is that if hegemon creates a regime, what should you expect to happen when the hegemon becomes no longer the most powerful state in the system? George.
It gets overthrown.
It's overthrown. In theory, if a strict realist person would say, look, when the hegemon goes, what happens to the regime? The regime goes. And so therefore, you should expect a collapse in the World Trade Organization, you should collapse in these other organizations. The Cohen piece that you have in the reading book today makes a really interesting argument. And the Cohen piece is from a book called After Hegemon. And what he argues in the book is that in practice, what happens to regimes when the hegemon fades from the system? The regime wants to stay in place. Now, why do the regimes stay in place? Why is it? If George is right, the realist argument is the hegemon goes, the regime goes.
So essentially, the hegemon is no longer needed, so that's why they remove them. Which
Right.
means the power is shifted to the other members.
Power shifted to other members of the regime, true. But then why would the other members of the regime overturn the system? See?
Well, it's like kind of benefiting them the way that people rigged previously.
Yeah.
You feeling that?
It benefits them. And Cohen lays out a number of different ways. What does it do? Lowers transaction costs, reduces the cost of uncertainty, deals with problems of asymmetric information. In other words, I don't know what you know, and you don't know what I know. Regimes make us reveal our trading data. Regimes make us reveal our scientific data about how much we're polluting. What Cohen argues is that these regimes oftentimes have a series of practical reasons. They reduce uncertainty, they lower transactions, they make stable interactions between states. And they wind up creating things like legal liability, which is important. Right? States have legal liability. I can hold other states accountable. And for those reasons, what you actually see is that members of regimes tend to uphold regimes even after the hegemon leaves. Hegemons tend to create regimes. They tend to get buy-in. They get buy-in because they don't want individually enforce regimes. But even after the hegemon fades, the regime remains intact. The status quo bias, as Jonathan put it, the status quo bias means that states are likely to uphold the regime more than anything else. Now, you guys may be saying, Boyle, this is a really technical point on Cohen. Why are you arguing this? Why are you making this point? Let me put this into a real context. Is the U.S. currently the hegemon of the system?
example with economics, with manufacturing, things along those lines. So if we break down different industries, we can say there's competition, but I think overall, U.S. can still be considered the hegemon at the moment.
Daniel?
I think because of the recent election now.
Okay.
When I was in Iceland, like I talked to a few people about their views on us, and that we're kind of considered a joke because of our recent president.
I'd say like seeing that their hegemon implies that like it's you have like kind of like a monopolistic system, whereas I think it's more like an oligopolistic system. Whereas like you have like a few real large players and then like a giant drop off.
Yeah, I mean, we may no longer be in the post-Cold War period where it's the U.S. and nobody else. I mean, both of you are making an argument, right? It might be the U.S.'s dominance in the military, but not in other things. This is why this matters, John.
Also, aside from China, looking at not just individual states, for example, like the European Union, things along those lines. So although the individual states as an organization, it could counterbalance that of the U.S. At the moment, though, cooperation with the hegemon, so it's not, there's no big discrepancy, but it still is almost a counterbalance if there should be a disagreement.
Yeah. The reason this is a fascinating question is if the U.S. is no longer the hegemon, what do you think is going to happen to World Trade Organization? What do you think is going to happen to the environmental conventions that we're all used to? What do you think is going to happen to the law of the sea? If the U.S. creates most of this in a post-1945 context, if it's straightly on the basis of power, in theory, does China uphold the World Trade Organization? $1 million question. Does China uphold the World Trade Organization? If we're moving to a system where the U.S. is no longer the hegemon, do all of the regimes set up to govern state behavior that was set up and underwritten by American power, do they fall apart? One of the big debates in the literature today is China doesn't obey the World Trade Organization. Some people argue, if you look at China, it is a status quo power that has gotten rich off an effective U.S.-run trading system. That the World Trade Organization, the degree to which we allow free movement of goods, has made China as a state wealthy. And if China wants to overturn the apple cart, it doesn't want to do it in trade. In which case, China has then, if you follow Cohen's argument, a strong incentive structure to keep regimes in place, even if it wants to overturn other things. Cohen says states, if they get enough benefits from it, might keep regimes in place, even if the hegemon no longer regulates enforcement. And you guys are going to live through and experiment on this. If the United States is no longer the most powerful state in the system in 20 years, does the U.S.-led institutional order based on all of these regimes fall apart? Or do the other states that got brought into these regimes and got discrete benefits from these regimes, are they such stakeholders in it that they have an incentive to keep using it? And if they do, then you're going to start to see a lot of these organizations, World Trade Organizations and others, limp on without U.S. involvement or with lesser U.S. involvement because the other states have benefited from the system. Okay, that's it. Thank you, guys.